Alrighty, good morning everyone and welcome to another Security Compass webinar. Today's webinar topic is Enterprise Architecture in DevSecOps. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Raquel Rodriguez, the Events Manager here at Security Compass and your host for today's webinar. Before we get started with the actual content, I'd like to give you a quick overview of Security Compass. For those of you who may not be aware of us until today, Security Compass was founded in 2004 and began with a team of experienced penetration testers. Today, we have come far and work with many large enterprises globally to manage their cybersecurity risk through balanced development automation. We have three key offerings. Our flagship product, SD Elements, enables organizations to deliver software quickly and reduce costs through automation. Our modular role-based e-learning solutions empower organizations to embrace DevSecOps, and our strategic advisory services offer expertise in cloud security, pen testing, and red teaming for a better security posture. Let's quickly go through some housekeeping items. As you may have noticed, you've all entered the session on mute. This is to reduce any background noise. Second, a recording of this webinar will be available after today's event. You will receive an email with a link to the recording. We will also be publishing the recording in the resources section of our website. Also, we encourage everyone to raise questions. Please submit your questions into the Q&A chat and we'll address them during our Q&A session. Lastly, if you'd like to follow up with us, or if you have a topic you'd like to see covered in a future webinar, please email us at contact@securitycompass.com. Like I mentioned, today's webinar topic is Enterprise Architecture in DevSecOps. I'm pleased to have here with me Hassan Yasser, Technical Director of Continuous Deployment of Capability Group in the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, and Altaz Villani, Director, Insights Research at Security Compass. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with me today. I know our audience is keen to hear your presentation, so I'll let you take it from here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Raquel. Appreciate that. And as Raquel had mentioned, please don't hesitate. If there's any question that you've got, reach out, put it into the chat window, put it into the Q&A. Let's make this interactive. We're all learning from each other here, and I think that this is going to be a fantastic session as we kind of move forward. So I'm going to quickly bring up a whiteboard here. Our discussion today is going to be around enterprise architecture and security. So I think before we even get started, there are many different people that have different ideas on what enterprise architecture is. So Hassan, maybe we could spend a little bit of time, first of all, just getting us all aligned on what we mean when we talk about enterprise architecture. You want to kind of kick off the conversation and give some thoughts on what enterprise architecture means from your perspective?
Sure. Thank you so much, Altaz, having me in, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Yes, it's really a confusing term when we talk about or anything enterprise architecture specifically. Actually, enterprise architecture is the principles and practice to guide organizations through the business, information process, risk management, governance to execute their strategy. That's what the overall enterprise architecture means. It's not just the software that we are building and calling about architecture, but it is including including some business information, with business value, like which domain we are in, what is our intent, what is our goal, and what we'd like to achieve as the business perspective, then we can be successful. Then second things, what type of process we have to follow up, what type of guidance we have to be aware of it, which goes back to the process pieces, right? Then we can list the processes like governance is an example, or the risk management is another example. Yeah. And while you're writing, so I would like to really list the keeping the process governance pieces and corporate business, then also technology pieces, which is, I know it's a typical classical term about technology, process, and people. And technology is two elements in technology. One, which we are building a component, maybe we are building some specific application for our own needs, or maybe we are building an application that we are selling it, that's directly related with business as well. So technology, it's the things that we are building, we are either putting into the systems in the product level, and at the same time, the infrastructure will help us to build up that product. or use the product.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
we can really put the technology piece in two pieces, like how building the product and how we use the product as an example. So let's say we are an organization, we're not maybe building a product, but however, we are a consumer of the product. Still, we need infrastructures that we can put in place and use that infrastructure for the product that we are using it for our business needs.
Right. So when we talk about enterprise architecture, it is the alignment of these broad concepts. And as we go to different frameworks, they may have different words for these, but it is essentially a layered concept that ties together what happens on the business side with what is happening on the technology side, right? We've heard for a long time that there's a disconnect between business teams and technical teams. Enterprise architecture serves to go in and bring that alignment between the two. Now, let's take that one step further. We have on the business side, we know today that the business wants to move really, really fast, right? Time to market is important. Getting the features out is important. These kinds of things are what enable revenue generation for the business. There are also other things, for example, brand and compliance and some of these things based on risk, as an objective, for example, risk management. But we also, when we take a look at the technology stack at the lower levels, that is evolving very quickly as well. We've got new methodologies, new technologies, new ways of looking at problems. We didn't have, some of the concepts around containers and virtualization that we have today, even just a few years ago. Cloud enablement was a big thing. Mobile was a big thing. So the technology landscape is continually evolving as we go forward. And the business side is moving as well. So we've got two of these layers are now moving very, very quickly. And of course, when we look at enterprise architecture, our objective should be to try and bring alignment between these two. Can you talk a little bit about your experience on some of the challenges? If we look at it as a current state today, where we've got a tech landscape that's moving, really rapidly, and a business landscape that is also moving very rapidly, what are some of the problems that we're seeing with our current models to bring alignment between the two?
So let's look at a couple of perspectives. One perspective, I'm going to put my DevOps lens on it, which I have been doing for years, which is more about building a product.
Yeah.
So when we build a product, and we are thinking that we can go fast, we can go quick, we can deliver on time for the customers. If you look at the typical metrics industry is advising, like a deployment frequencies, and time to recover, time to detect, these are typical metrics. It's all speed oriented. It's all moving something fast into the pipeline, into the user's hand. Yes, it's okay to have something, but how much we are aligning with the business value and how much we are aligning with our risk management. Actually, maybe we can say that, yes, it is okay that we are getting something for the users can use, but with respect to security, how much we can spend time and money for security that will align our business prioritization. That's the missing component, seems to me, Altes. So let's say, specifically on the bigger pictures, the product that we have, and what is the related risk perspective an organization will deal. And the risk, we can look at the governance pieces. The governance is about the policies and enforcements and risks and compliances, we can call under that umbrella. And what things we can do to comply our product, we are using it. So usually we do after the fact. And I see very rare organizations are there trying to put the governance pieces in their product building perspective. Why they're not doing it? Because it's time consuming, first of all, or it's not aligned, or it's not really shared with the organizational team that owned by the governance, let's say. So there are some cultural barriers. That goes back to our enterprise architecture definition. If we kept architecture only limited to the software they were building, we are missing a big picture of the organizational structures. Organizational structures mean organizational policy, organizational value, organizational mission are very well aligned together. So we may have overall organizational thinking, then risk is part of it, as we discussed. Then the product that we are building should be tied to the risk that we are either to take it, or we are okay to that, or we have some risk threshold, then very specific affecting our cost and time for security. That's the kind of the connection pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this would be a good time, Raquel, if you can throw up that first poll question we've got. And while people are answering that question, I think it's important to also consider, when we look at this alignment between what we have between the business, the process, the technology, the data that we've got. We oftentimes hear about this concept of a fabric, right? We've got a risk fabric or we've got a security fabric. Essentially, what we are talking about here is our ability to go in and to take a look and see how we look at the business side, and we kind of blow this up a little bit further, and we start to look at the various layers, and within these layers, we will have certain key deliverables that attach themselves to other key deliverables in other layers as well. But eventually they roll up and give us what we're looking for from a business perspective. And I think this is another area where if we don't have this alignment, not just conceptually, but also to be able to go and to instantiate this and have the ability now to track and to automate much of this stuff, in this fast-moving DevOps environment, then I think that's where we're not quite able to align with what the business needs are. And I think that that's an important thing to kind of call out here. It's not a bad thing, right? We've been doing enterprise architecture for some time. It's just when we start to go really, really quickly, it starts to put pressure on rethinking how we look at the enterprise architecture model, right?
Mhm.
It's not so much of we've got a business team over here and we've got a technology team over here, and the business assigns something to the technology team and it's a project delivery model and we're done. This is now much more of a product mindset where you don't necessarily have an end. You're continually evolving your product, and new features and new enhancements are being put in place, and it's that kind of thinking. And how could we possibly get the right security and risk into all of this in an automated way so that we are both moving quickly and we're still at the same time balancing that with the risk and security models that we've got, right? And if we take a look kind of at our a poll here and just see what some of the responses have been, how productive do you currently feel about your enterprise architecture in the context of value creation? So looking at the alignment between DevOps and what the EA teams are doing, just for the audience that we've got today, in most cases, there's some stuff being done, but there's some additional work that needs to be done as well, right? In terms of maturing and getting us into a new way of looking at how we can automate some of this stuff. Hassan, any comments on the response that's kind of come back?
That surprised me, actually. I was expecting to see the similar things. Somehow we are agreed, somehow we have an alignment with enterprise architect, with Agile and security perspective.
Hmm.
And somehow actually it's a vague definition as well, because we don't know we are doing something. Yes, we are following the guidelines, we are following the business value, and we are missing still the overall picture of our perspective. There are a couple of things maybe can open up that topic about the somehow, somewhat definition.
Yeah.
And let's look a little bit about enterprise security model as an example. Like stuff from enterprise architect, when we focus on the security perspective,
Yeah.
in a typical enterprise security program model, so we have an operation is in the middle circle, an organization that we are operating, and we make sure that we have incident management systems and vulnerability management systems and compliance administration deployment, which is kind of an inner operational model. So when we go to outer circle, then we're looking for the system architectures that will help us to build up the product or the system, or that for either our own needs or building a product that we are selling it. So that piece is actually consists of some development activity, which is the technical pieces of the architecture we are talking about. Architectural design and overall an organization that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And think about the ecosystem that we are using a phone as an example. So phone is used from end users phone, but we have a behind the scene, the backend or the cloud environment, so backend infrastructure that's connected other piece of component in organizations. Like let's say if we are storing a data from the phone, we have a phone app, some app is running in the phone. So we have some specific data, then we would like to keep it data in our cloud storage. So now what type of data are we going to keep track that? That goes back to the governance piece as an example. And how are we going to scale up? That goes back to the architectural elements. How can we set authentications either internally or externally? So we need to understand the overall architectural design of system that we are building. But if you look at architecture design, Altez, the drivers, it's come from the governance pieces, which is a little bit above again. Now we go. So we start operation, we went to higher up for the development activities. Now we're looking for governance, which is governance pieces are the principles and policies and standards and enforcements come from that governance perspective. And a higher level, which is the business value. So all this inner circle should connect with each other. I know with the context of agility or context of DevOps, we are always focusing the module that we are working in the specific perspective. What we know that in a typical DevSecOps environment or a typical software delivery environment, we may be able to get the one product, maybe one of the modules of that product. We cannot build up a whole product line into a single software delivery pipeline. So when you scale up, let's say I have 10 team members are building up applications, and eventually they are building a piece of component of this application. So one approach, maybe we can use a microservices concept, each of the modules that we are building, and building up a containerization in it, which is kind of implementation. But how this microservices going to talk to each other's, or how the modules are going to talk to each other's. Now we need to understand overall enterprise architect thinking and each of this module, how they can interact, how they can communicate that. So in the small pieces, we are doing agile, which is somehow what definition for me, in a small modules, in a small team. When I say small team, maybe in Amazon term is about a pizza size team, right? In a team, we are working the agile mindset. But when we look at the overall life cycle, we are not connected at both ends. So overall life cycle means and how we get the requirements and how we do the operation and the maintenance. So I like the one terminology from Jez Humble. He says the water scrum fall, because we are trying to get the waterfall approach, get out of it, looking for more agility. Now we are focusing agility in a team level. When we look at the team level, we are doing great in a team level. Now we are still doing actually waterfall because we don't really connect the compliance yet. We don't really connect to the business needs yet. We don't really connect to the needs specific or operational need yet. So there was actually an interesting study, Altez, I would like to share with you. There was a software delivery survey report came this year. The software delivery report was saying interesting output based on the survey. One was the specific says there is inability of tracking the cost of defect or cost of the fix in a bigger pictures. That's an industry survey, by the way. I thought it's a government survey, actually from industry. People are still struggling to track the cost, either the fixing or cost of new features. What is really telling me we're not really tying to our business objective yet.
Yeah, the fabric is missing. Yeah.
Right, it is still missing. When you look at the software delivery perspective, we are not really connecting that yet. That reason is really important to see where we are in the big pictures. And think about that like a puzzle as an example. We are, as a team, as a group or a product we are building, and we are in the big pictures, but we are talking each other. So we have to really know big pictures first. So it's a limited knowledge. And how can we know the big pictures? And I'm hearing that question. I don't know. Do I have to know everything? And how can I understand my big pictures? How can I understand my security architecture as an example? And why I'm going to rewrite again for authentication modules. Why don't use another authentication module has been generated already from that organization or another team members as an example.
Interesting. Yeah. So let me pick on that a little bit. We know that our current state is speed oriented. We talked about certain business priorities around security and risk are missing. Compliance and governance is done after the fact. And we want to move to a model where this is being done incrementally. It's aligned with the business. We have a security and compliance fabric built into this. Now, you're talking at this point about one way that we can move from the current state to the future state, which is to look at these components that are reusable. That's an interesting concept, and I've seen a lot of that emerging in the industries to sort of start to take a look at hardened components that can be reused, and in fact, looking at security as being an enabler for speed now, really, which traditionally wasn't the case, right? The real business value comes in when you've got these components that are ready to go, and by reusing these things, you can now build additional solutions and services based on, without having to go back and recomply and recertify from a security perspective. Can you talk from your experience? I know you've got a lot of experience in this space with looking at the different layers of compliance and security, and how do you actually do that? What are some of the steps?
So it's a very loaded question, but I've tried to answer as much as I can. Yes, it is. It's a long discussion, by the way. Let's
It
have
is.
a quick 30,000-foot view. I can give an answer. And you said a key one about the reusability, which an organization are taking advantage of it. Why reusability is important in a bigger picture. So, and actually kind of related with the modularity perspective or the enterprise architect as well. So if we are very well aligned with our business goal, we can build up a modules of that component we are building as a team. And then that modular, how can we achieve the reusabilities? Now the current technology is giving that capability for us, such as containerization example. So that module we are building, actually module behind the scene can be a microservice as an example, right? We said, I'm going to build up that service. That service has specific objective, and we call it an SLA, a service level agreement, and what the service is going to supply. To achieve that SLA, we are putting two other elements. So I'm just going to come back to the reusable again. So two elements we do. One is the SLO, service level objectives, that will help us to support our agreement with other team members or the third-party team members. So we start from module, which is services. We start from SLA. We go to SLO. So SLO is internal for ourselves, and ourselves means our team member, for a specific objective we have to achieve. What the specific objectives are, maybe some response time for the service that we are building, maybe some data elements we are building. And we're going to go a little bit lower again, one dip layer, and we're going to put the SLI, which is another indicator, service level indicators. So service level indicators are specific to a team, which based on the fact, based on the numbers. So this type of the definition of the agreement between the specific modularities will help us to build up a reusabilities in a big pictures. So because now team knows what to do, and actually Google apply that concept very well. They call it an SRE concept, but they're using a lot of different modules. Every module are independent from each other. So with this concept. So as long as if we keep the constraints of this measurement pieces, SLAs and SLOs and SLIs, will help us to define what the model it is, what the reusable it is, which is one, find out what we can do, what are the components are. Second, which is a containerization again, and we need to approve each of the components in a big pictures. Like if we are selling any products, or if we are building a product that customers are using it from our side, we have to make sure that we are following the right guidance. The right guidance are not just for security perspective, and security is for the known vulnerabilities. So we have to go beyond that. So approval is looking for the common vulnerabilities which have to do. Second one, how we make sure that the product or the component that we are building is compliant with the governance, like our risk postures. And let's see, if you are the healthcare, we have to make sure that we are compliant with the HIPAA regulation example. So this is kind of approval pieces. So approval, if you're able to get approval in a modularity level, then once we say, yes, we are approved these modules, we can reuse over and over again. That's reason defining the service level objective and indicator will help us to get an approval of this. And typically, if you really define, like in an example, if you're defining an agreement, And we have to really consult with the legal team member to define an agreement. As a developer, we cannot write an agreement by ourselves.
Yeah.
When I see organizations and they're trying to write an agreement as a developer perspective, no. Like, how can we justify if the service outage as related to this non-security vulnerabilities, if data got breached and then we expose the customer data? It's a legal issue.
Mm-hmm.
So tying that security in an example with the agreement that we are doing it, then we actually getting an agreement from a higher level and all the way to the modularity level we are bringing. So once we approve that piece of code, which is a module, then we can reuse over and over and over and again, because that's what the constraints are. That's what the approval is. How we are
Mm-hmm.
achieving and defining some agreement, which we discover all, and also we can use the technology such a container as an example, and we can maybe Dockerize it, or we can put a different type of container technologies and package it. So we put the constraints and boundaries around it and deploy into our production environment or give it to the customers.
Yeah. So just to
And in the,
paraphrase kind of where,
please,
sorry, go ahead, please. End
yeah.
your thought.
I would like the one more thing in the container, Altez also.
Yeah.
In the containers, it doesn't mean that we have to bundle an individual container for each of the services. So we have to really be smart to define the container as well with the context of modularities. So
Mm-hmm.
having a one giant container, putting an Oracle in it, it is not a good approach. When I say the reusabilities, the container should be a smaller size, should be layered. That's also true for the architecture perspective. Then reusability should help us to use any individual components easily, and I should be able to add another layer on top of that module that I'm using it, and still I can carry out the base modules. So some organizations are really building a architecture thinking as modularities in a layered approach, which is really mapping with their container technology they were using it, so they can let the developer use the same component over and over and again. Let's say start from the base image as an example. Base images, which is operating systems, which is directly approved from the IT operations teams. So once I have the base image as an operating system, I can go a little bit higher and look at for application stack. That application stack can be specific to some web technology as an example. So I can do the multiple web stack in different containerizations or different layers. Then I can go higher and higher, and I can go to an application layer. Application layer can be a UI layer or business layer or data layer. So we can really define the layer thinking, how we do it architecturally. We can reflect into our reusability perspective in the container. And by talking about all this SLA and SLO will help us to get a big pictures. So it's not really a one day job, it's a journey. So we have to really understand that. We have to live it. We have to talk with other stakeholders. That's the agility piece comes in the picture. How can we build up that component of this? We need to talk other stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think this has been something that those in the EA practice have been advocating for a long time, is to try and get everybody around the table if we're going to achieve the alignment, and much more so now in an environment where we're moving so fast and the delivery cycles have in fact been shortened. Even what we used to do historically about trying to move quickly with agile delivery and looking at speed to get things out, if we now look at componentizing this stuff and making it modular with the intent that these are going to be building blocks for the future, this is in fact now the sort of the modus operandi for how we can enable greater agility for the business to move forward. And we're using security as the vehicle to help enable that. Right. And it's interesting that the narrative in the industry right now happens to be a lot around security and agility. These two, as you'd mentioned previously, happen to be at odds, historically, but they are now in fact converging. And the EA practice has a role to play in how we can bring all of this thinking together now to help us move forward. So let me probe a little bit further then, Hassan. So we talked about the modularity component of this. And so we've got these building blocks. From a business perspective, the business generally, when we look at how they operate, strategies change over time, and we should expect that. The goal is to make sure that we are aligned with what the business is looking for. Now, from a developer's perspective, we found that it was best to bring down the amount of work that we did, and with this incremental delivery, we were at least trying to achieve value delivery with what the business was looking for. The EA perspective on this now is actually considerably larger because it is an enterprise perspective where we will get legal and compliance and risk and security and everybody else involved with this. But the concept of having these incremental delivery pieces to align with the business strategy doesn't go away. It's still a healthy concept, at least from what we are looking at today as a best practice, to enable us to look at it now at an architectural level. So that's, it's interesting that you bring up the idea of modularity and componentization and reusability. It's happening at the lower levels. We need to bring that up now and take a look at it from an enterprise perspective on how we can do this kind of incremental value delivery, right, to kind of help things move forward. Now, let me bring up some twists and turns that can happen here. Let's say we go and we have a particular architectural component that is compliant with something, particular standard or a framework. Now, these frameworks and standards are also evolving over time, right? What do we do in terms of the governance of managing these components and the life cycle of trying to bring all of these moving pieces together? Specifically, when something changes in a framework or a standard, what does that look like for the architectural components that we've got, which have been certified against something that maybe was historically done? Now, how do we avoid massive regression problems in something like this? What do we do?
So let's start from the problem perspective. And usually it's the same as true for the security thinking as well. We always try to be reactive mode to solve the problem, which is a similar things like we build it and everything is, we have so many modularities, we have so many code pieces. Now, how can we change that? Which, if we know that the requirement at the beginning that will change, or we should have an agility for the modularities or the life cycle of each components. While we are building the component, we should always remember that question. So it's becoming more proactive changes. So if you look at the really Agile manifestos or the 4 tenets, it says you should be accept and welcome any changes anywhere in life cycle. It's also true how we are building modularities. So we always ask ourselves, I maybe change that modularities, the requirements, which is agility mindset at the beginning. And it's not, another thing, agility is not always specific to the technology or the product that we are building. The agile mindset is also true for the business agility, which we another thinking perspective, which is changing our policies and changing some other flexibility in our acquisition perspective, maybe, and changing some flexibility in our overall organization. And also to achieve that agility, we are expecting to communicate very well. That's the second piece. It's like we like to say, yes, we're going to be an agile, but we are not communicating. That's not going to work out. We have to be communicative. We have to be open. And we can talk with the team members. So another note, and for the audience and you as well, I read a recent article about the CEO of the GitLab. He said the one thing that really surprised me. He said, as a GitLab, we're an organization, we have been working as a remote for years. We never had an office. He said, one thing we do, we are taking notes, everything what we do as a team. Either the meetings, we go, either the any lesson learns, we are populating a tremendous of learning data. That's an asset of our organizations. That struck me. That's really what telling me these people are communicating very well in each other's. So communication means like sharing. So they're able to share the problems or solutions, and they are building a lot of guidebooks. And the GitLab, they have, and if I remember correctly, they have more than 70,000 guidance they build up so far. It's a huge. So what is really taking, like, whatever the model we are building, that's to our modularities perspective. We really think about that in a way that we should be able to change, we should be welcome to change. So to welcome the change, we have to understand the life cycle of the module we are building. So how can we understand what the life cycle of modules? How are we going to building, where we are storing, and which service got affected? And if we need a rollback of each of the services, we should have an asset management. Isn't that the same thing for the risk management perspective? We should have an asset for each of the the component or system we are using it. Same also true for the module. We should have an asset management of each modules. Where are we using it? How are we using it? How we are building? And that goes back to, again, fundamental principles of DevOps and Agile. We are saying, in DevOps perspective, we should really tie the work we do from beginning to end. We should have a full traceabilities. So how we can achieve the traceabilities in a module that we are building, then tie the module for a reason that we are building. That's the first requirements. That goes back to our business requirements.
Yeah.
And then carry out all these activities, things that we are building. And when we are done, which is in our production environment, it's up and running. So share that artifacts are code itself and also the other supported documents. That's the reason I brought that SLOs and SLAs and SLI in the pictures. These are the information will help us to understand what the services we are using. Where are these services? So if we know the specific component of the systems, and we'll become an agile.
Interesting. So, we talked about the current state, we talked about the future state. We've even got, at least 5 activities that we can do.
Okay.
Modularization, SLO, SLA, SLI focus, always looking at approval from a big picture perspective with compliance, risk, and legal, getting everybody involved with this, with the intent that we're going to land into this incremental delivery model that's going to come forward. What are some of the challenges in trying to do some of these activities, right? What could be potential blockers? And I'd like to think about this a little bit. EAs need to consider how much can we actually initiate the change. We're always looking for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 as we look at gradually rolling this out. And maybe we can talk a little bit now about what are some of the blockers and how could we potentially mitigate against some of these to at least get us going down the journey. And everybody's journey is going to be different. But
Exactly.
What are some of these blockers that you've kind of seen from your experience?
Yeah. So the couple blockers, I see a technology blockers, I see a culture the blockers, and organization structure blockers. I know it's a classical term again, but these are the exist still. So what the culture problems are, and the culture, it's more looking for, and in terms of like incentives or in terms of sharing, it's more rigid, more siloed structures, more siloed cultures, which is a barrier and for any information sharing or communications. And another things I can bring up is about the technical blockers. Technical blockers are, so we have so much restrictions or so much technology choices or the various technology choices, and technology tools are not communicating each other's or not talking their different environments, different silos. We're not able to access it. And even though you and I, we would like to talk, but we cannot communicate in the same tools, the same technologies. Like how we're using the whiteboard right now, we can all see each other. If I'm using different systems and Cisco as an example, using Zoom right now, then we have technical problems for us we have to overcome. And third one is the leadership. Like leadership is the higher level team members. So leadership should put a more team-oriented structures, and leadership should be advocating in a different way of the either promoting the people or incentivize the people or the team members. Like one example, if the organization are looking for a developer to incentivize them with the number of line of code, it's a wrong metrics. Or if you're looking for an organization such as IT operation team, keeping their system reliabilities and higher, it's a wrong metrics. We have to look at how can we improve our learning cultures, first of all. Okay. So I know these are typical blockers, but how can we overcome the blockers? We have to really understand the root cause of the analysis of each blockers. That's the reason you said, I agree with you, every organization is different than others. We have to understand who we are first. And rolling out the enterprise architect style security perspective or rolling out some modular this perspective, we have to assess, understand ourselves, which is the step first. Who we are, what are we trying to do? And try to understand who we are, what things we are trying to build, and what our assessment plan, and what is our goals and objective. When we try to look at the goals and objectives, we have to build up the right metrics that we would like to monitor ourselves for the better or next phase, like really getting the baseline first, okay, which is kind of metrics pieces. And then the second phase, build up some or use the Pathfinder project or Pathfinder group, and based on the assessments, and try to implement that in a small scale, because you cannot change organization in one day. It's a journey, but you're going to start from somewhere else. So as the leadership or a team member, we can roll out this concept, either building up a modularity concept and tying to our enterprise architectures, or make it enterprise architect as an organization, build up that. So we can start in a team, in a group, in a program level, as an example. So when we do the program level, we can see what type of problems that we see, we can improve it. And we will immediately see that that may be some technical skill set issues, which HR department should help us on training, as an example, which haven't covered up so far yet. But and based on our assessments, we will see the problems immediately, and then we can start implement that solution for the problems in a small scale. And each program will start in a small scale eventually, that can be rolled out to the organizations. So,
Interesting.
And yeah, so that's kind of like a step-by-step approach. And always we have to build in a team, and then we can train our folks and how to use and how to create and how to build modularities, how to behave, how to communicate. Training is not always learning the new tools. Training is always learn how to better communicate with person, to understand, to share the knowledge, to build up the learning culture. There are many things we can train our folks. Now everyone's working remote sessions. It's a great opportunity for us to learn and train.
Yeah.
So roll out the plan that we assess at the beginning, and measure the plan. So measure means like where we were in the baseline and where we are right now. So select that metrics and adjust it. So based on what we see, we can adjust it and go back in another group members or the same group, same team members. So when we do that, we will see a journey in a couple, maybe a year, maybe it depends on the size of organizations.
Yeah.
We can change that.
Yeah,
right.
It's interesting looking at what you've just described, and going one level deeper. Some of the barriers that I've seen to this kind of incremental delivery. Really, it's first of all a complete shift in mindset from a project mindset to a delivery mindset. And there are implications for that from an executive standpoint, all the way down to teams that are doing the delivery. When you think about the fact that, if you're delivering features, that you will constantly be looking for ways to offer value to whoever your end customer is, whether it's internal to the organization, external to the organization, with that kind of a mindset, it comes with looking at different ways of collaborating and making sure that we minimize some of the rework. If we look, for example, from a security lens perspective, making sure that we've got these reusable components that are in fact sufficiently hardened. So by the time we get to that delivery stage, we are trying to reduce some of the noise that will come out from some of the tools, even like code scan tools or pen testing results or things like that, all intended to help drive this agility, this incremental agility at the architectural level that we're trying to promote. Other things that I've seen, as you'd mentioned, the integration, I think, is a huge thing. The fact that we've got risk teams that have their own set of systems, and we've got security teams with their own set of systems, and project delivery teams have their own issue tracking systems, and all of these systems are not really talking to each other. And so the idea that we have to come in, and if we're going to at all achieve any kind of balance between trying to deliver quickly and manage our risk, somehow these systems have to come together and be able to share this information. And I know there's been some good work being put out by folks like at MITRE, for example. But as an industry to adopt these standards, I think is going to be an important piece, a standardization of trying to bring this stuff together. And I know, Hassan, in some of your work, you've looked at the DevOps pipeline, And even the tools that we've got in the DevOps pipeline, they're all different. They all have data in them. But the problem is there's no way to bring all of this stuff together to make sense of it in order to make an informed decision, right? So it's like, it works well in this domain within development as an example, but what does it mean from a program delivery standpoint as an example? So I think that integration and creating that fabric is an important piece that I found is missing. And there's another area that you brought up, which was around making sure that people look at how can we go from a leadership standpoint to advocate for this. For a long time, if we take a look at development teams, their focus, because it's been on speed, concepts like security and privacy haven't really been there. And because we haven't had the training necessary to do this, usually we look at a gap, a knowledge gap that exists from an execution standpoint, which can in fact be painful initially when we assess our current state. And looking at how do we go and how do we now start to kind of bring this out to the forefront to say, even when we look at training, for example, it's not an end state, but it is a continuous journey as we move along. And I'd like to kind of poll the audience at this point and let's talk a little bit about this influence that enterprise architecture has. So Raquel, if you can kind of put something up there, do you have influence over the enterprise architecture process at this point? Let's see what kind of where we're at right now. Can we influence across these different levels? We've talked about advocacy. We've talked about different teams working together. Is it reasonable to suggest that teams are able to do that and enterprise architecture has a role to play in being able to go and influence this? So far as the results have been coming in, we'll give it maybe another 5 seconds and then we'll share these results, Raquel. But so far, it seems like most people, in fact, do have an influence. So that's what it looks like at this point, which is good news, which is what we would expect to see, at least from my perspective, for the enterprise architecture team. They're decision makers. They can go in there. They're able to go and start to make and sort of bridge the gap between the business and technical sides. So the practice is there. We know what we need to do. We have to rethink the delivery mechanisms that we're looking at as kind of helping the business move forward and taking it to the next step of a modern way of delivery. Anyway, enough talking on my side. Hassan, like your thoughts, what do you think about this?
So actually, that reminds me another interesting quote, and I'm happy to hear that there's an influences. But to make sure that our influences is going to affect in a bigger pictures, I always like to use the fact. We have to be real objective in our influences. Why we are doing it? Why is that? To support the device statements, we always have to use some objective data, which is the metrics and measurement. And I like the quote from Lord Kelvin. He's a physicist. He's one of the famous person in the 1900s. He said, a statement said, when you can measure what you are speaking about and can express in the numbers and you know something about it. It's really a strong statement. If you're able to measure it, if you're able to say a number, support our hypothesis or the effect or the things we are building, we know something. So start from the micro level in a team level and support with the right data sets. Why we are doing it? Why are we going to change that? What is the cost of the changes? That's what the management is typically asking about it, isn't that? That's what the leadership is saying about it. So always we have to justify and quantify our numbers and reason with the supported data. And I bet you, once we get the right data with the numbers, and leadership will support it. But however, we do all assumptions. We don't want to make any assumptions anymore. With the current technology, with the current landscape, we can generate that. We can generate the numbers. We can use the actual data. We can measure ourselves. And other things I would like to bring another idea in this concept, and I don't like the essentialism concept. When we look at the problem at the end, it is hard to solve as a big pictures. But when we get in a smaller scale, and we can deal much easier. Same thing true for the security, same thing for the complexity, same thing for enterprise perspective. Start in a let's say think about the modularity again. what is the important element for the modules and why we are doing it? What is our surrounded communication or component with that modules?
Yeah.
That actually we are focusing on what we are doing the work, because we cannot solve the oceans or the world problem yet, but we can solve the problem that we have control on it. When we solve the problem that we are working on it, we can interact with other team members. That's the communication pieces that we have been saying so far. That's the way we can understand, ask other people. That's the way we can really build up our learning cultures. Like same thing for the learning pieces. We don't want to train everybody, pause everything else, let them train. It's waste of time. We would look at the training as on demand. I have a problem and I would like to learn to solve that problem so that can stay with us when we are learning and practicing.
Yeah.
Because if you're not practicing the learning will stay maybe 6 months and after it's gonna go. I don't remember any book I read it 2 years ago. I don't. Do you remember, Altis? I don't think you remember the same
No.
thing. But when we practice it, what we learn,
Yeah, the
it
reinforcement.
resonates. Yes,
Yeah.
it's kind of, it stay with us. But
Yeah.
to achieve that, again, that goes back to our overall enterprise thinking and how we can roll out that type of mechanisms. How can we enable as a micro learner concept of the things we are building?
Yeah.
And how can we build up a team that influence others using effect, using numbers? And
Yeah.
quick advice, if you are building a product, again, using our DevSecOps environment, and how can we generate the right data set to fill up to the managers or the justification or the business values, like cost? As I said, what is the cost of the new features that we're going to roll out? Is it an assumption based on expert, based on the knowledgeable person?
Mhm.
Is it based on the fact data we can generate it? Two things are
Mhm.
really important. If we have a data, which we should, which almost every DevOps environment is generating data, but we are not a good consumer of that data. If we use that data in an appropriate way, let's like if you're using a basic, very basic fundamental concept, if you're using any planning tools, we can estimate, we can keep the actuals as well. The two
Yeah.
things really help us to find out what is the cost of the things we are building. And another traceability is if you're able to keep all the modularities that we are using it, if we use such basic infrastructure as a code concept, we can trace any little artifact that we are using in infrastructures and using a code perspective as well. Same. If using such a basic elements of the repository management, keeping a centralized our software delivery pipeline, keep everything the single repositories, we can do. An example like a Google, they have only single repositories. They have hundreds and thousands of projects in the single repo. Everybody can access it. That's why they can build up an overall complex. So as I give an example from the GitLab and sharing information accessible with others, that's how we can roll out our enterprise thinking.
Yeah. So speaking
If
of
we,
that, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Hassan.
yeah, if we keep that our enterprise architect in a senior level in our drawer in our computer, it's useless.
Yeah. Speaking
Doesn't
of
mean
this whole
anything.
idea of sort of containers now, I'd like to pop in, and there was a question that came in earlier, and I think we can start to inject some Q&A in here as well. So the question is, for container security, how do you evaluate if security findings of open source components in container images have a direct impact to the overall architecture of the project? So there's this idea, we talked about modularization, we talked about creating components, we talked about containers, but how do you evaluate if the security findings of OSS, of the open source software components in these containers, have an impact to the overall architecture? How do we sort of map from that small, component
Yeah.
to the overall architecture?
It's a great question. We always look at what the container security tools are saying for us, high, low risk, medium. That number it's a generic number. It's based on the industry knowledge, but we should really ask ourselves, there may be some of the libraries has the vulnerabilities in it. If you're not using that library, what is the risk level that we can take it? To take that risk level, we have to understand the component, what is the purpose of this component or the module that we're using it against which component in the bigger pictures that should tie into our organization risk policies. That's we should evaluate that. We should look at, yes, there is some vulnerabilities. Yes, we can fix it, but If we have another controllers, what is the risk parameters on this? So we can put a prioritization of fixing some vulnerabilities in the container. Another the thought as well, when we look at in detail of the container file, actually it's using the some libraries, like container is the definition. I know if you're not looking for the namespace concept or the administrative privileges or networking components, if you're looking for just a library perspective, then we can use the generalized libraries in our artifact catalog, build a container from that libraries. We're using the internal container registry services, we can manage that. So basically, do more proactive again, and use the right libraries that we're using. It only things if we are getting a container from a third party, that's a problem. We have to analyze that third party containers all the time. If we are building containers, we are basically using the same library that we already scan. Let's say if you're using a Tomcat Apache in your container, if you have a Tomcat Apache as in your organization that have an artifact catalog, use that library over there. If you're using maybe a Maven package and put an internal libraries and use from internal libraries, that can be part of your container as an example.
Yeah. And
So
I think,
maybe,
I agree. Sorry, Hassan. So I agree with what you're suggesting. It's like eventually when all of these components work together, and we're finding these security, items across each of these components, it has to roll up into something which is going to work at a macro level, which has to be something that's important to the business. Risk is something that you had suggested, and I've seen that as well. Compliance is another one. So if we look at, if there's some result that came out for this particular component, what does it mean for compliance for the overall architecture? You can take a look at that. And so we see the mapping now of architecture with frameworks and standards and these things, and the intersection of these as they come together. You need to know and map out what that means for each component as you're rolling this out. There was another question that came in for remediation of open source software in container images. Any repo list that we may use or finalize in order to be compliant with the vulnerability management process that the organization follows?
yeah, so the organization should have some open source policies. And without having an open source policy, there is no way we can really validate and verify any vulnerabilities or libraries. So two things, either we should have, if we don't have it, we can start to build up we can take an advantage of the nation vulnerability database or the MITRE database that is already available, or use any tools and start implement that. So I'm not against using an open source, but we have to know what we are using. If we don't know recipes of the things we are building, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
Like I always give analogies. If you look at our health, we always go look at the ingredients of the things we are eating. When we get the software, we have to look at the ingredients of the software, which is kind of a bill of materials. We have to understand what the libraries are using it. We should have internal validation and vetting process. If you don't, start to build up. And if you know what we're using it, we should be ready for any response.
Yeah, I think this internal repo becomes really important. The concept that came up in the question itself, you do need a repository that will track all of this stuff for you in a fast moving DevOps world where the business strategies are changing as well, right? Something that creates the alignment between these, and there's an emergence of these tools now in the DevOps space that will go and that will bring these things together now, where we've got the balancing of what's happening on the business side and the risk and the compliance, and the DevOps teams moving quickly as well. I think there's a whole lot we can talk about here, especially when it deals with the supply chain and how do you roll out supply chain and containers across, different companies. But we've actually run out of time at this point, and I'm getting my cue at this point. So Raquel, we'll hand it over to you. Please bring us to a land. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much again, Hassan and Altaz, for another great session. If anyone had any more questions that they would like answered, please do email us at contact@securitycompass.com. Just to let you all know, we do have webinars lined up for the remainder of the year. So if you're interested in attending any of these, please visit the upcoming events and webinars section of our website to sign up. We hope that everyone found this presentation insightful. And again, we will be providing a link of the recording of this webinar via email. Thank you so much again for attending, and please have a great day.